Welcome, everyone, to Dark Winter Nights. I've got to admit, the first time that Hollywood called me, I was a little bit starstruck. You see, it was this production company in Hollywood. They said, could I find them someone that they could do a reality TV show about up here? And if I found them someone, they would pay me a whole $250. So basically, they would make millions off the distribution and sales of this reality TV show that I had set right into their laps. And in return, I would get $250. That was the first time that Hollywood called me. The second time Hollywood called, they were looking for someone who lived in a dry cabin. You see, they were doing this program about people buying homes in Alaska. And they wanted to find someone who already lived in a dry cabin so they could take that person and have them pretend to go shopping for a dry cabin, and lo and behold, pick the one they already lived in. So I worked my rear end off, calling people, putting it on Facebook. Anybody know anybody who lives in dry cabins? I sent them name after name after name after name. Then what happened? Nothing. I never heard any word back from them again. They never told me when they came to shoot the program. They never told me who they picked. They had what they wanted from me, and they were done. And that's when I said, I'm done with this. No longer am I going to be the northern yokel who drops everything every time there's a Hollywood area code on my caller ID, right? If people want stories about Alaska, well, then Alaskans can bring them to it. And so that is what this is about tonight. I went and searched high and low for the best stories about Alaska I could find, and you would not believe what I found. There are people walking on the street here in Alaska, everyday people, who have experienced things that would blow away all the stuff we've ever seen on every reality TV show ever. And so, brace yourselves, Alaska, because it's time for a new era in this state, an era where Alaskans share their own stories with the world. I have found you tonight 10 storytellers, all who have amazing stories, some of whom shouldn't be here because of their stories, and that's what you're going to hear this evening. My name is Robert Prince. I teach in the journalism department at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and I would like to thank the journalism department for sponsoring this event tonight. You've already been enjoying the music from my favorite band, Thought Trade. Let's have a round of applause for Thought Trade. So, our first storyteller tonight was also the first one to submit his story at darkwinternights.com. And James Menaker is a dear friend of mine, and I thought if this is the very first story that I get, this is going to be a great evening. And so I think you're going to enjoy James and his story, which I call Abandoned Truck.
Well, I was bummed. My whole family was bummed, actually. It was 1984. I was 10 years old. I had two younger brothers. One was 9, one was 5. And my dad had just bought a piece of property out off of 26 Mile Chena Hot Springs Road. And he was going to take us out there on a nice long weekend to explore the property. And we had been planning this for a month or so. And the week leading up to it, it rained nonstop. It was one of those rainy summers that we sometimes get in Fairbanks. It had rained. Rain is a light word. It had poured for the week leading up to it, and we were all just feeling bummed. My mom especially, because she lived in a house full of 4 guys, and she was really excited about being able to have a nice, long, quiet weekend. The Thursday before we were going to leave, the rain stopped and the skies cleared, and my dad said, "It is game on. We are going tomorrow." We were so excited because we were confident that the rain would not bother us anymore on this trip. And then So we load up into the truck, my dad's old red and white Dodge pickup truck that he had driven for 15 years. We load the canoe on top of it. We've got a truck canopy on the back of it. We load it up with supplies and camping gear and everything you need for a long weekend of hiking and exploring. We put my dad in the driver's seat, and the three of us get into the cab, and off we go. And my mom is waving, smiling, tears of joy coming down her face as she has a pile of books that will not be interrupted. So as we drive out to Chino Hot Springs Road, we find our turnoff, and we go down this winding, gravelly, bumpy road, the kind they still have there. And we come down to the river, and we're like, this looks like a great place to set up camp. The river's, I won't lie, the river's high. It's swollen, but it looks like we'll set up our camp for the evening, and then we'll go across tomorrow. It'll be great. So we get our camp set up round about 4:35 in the afternoon, and we notice the river's higher than it used to be. Well, okay, so we'll move farther up the road. That's not a problem. By the time we get our camp taken down, the river is noticeably higher. So we move substantially farther up the road and get the tent up and get the fire going, and it keeps following us, this river. We decide maybe we should find another camping spot. And so as we're taking down the tent, by the time we get camp taken down the second time and loaded into the truck, the fire has been put out by the river. Haste might be required here. So again, we load everything up into the truck. Dad gets in and drives. The three of us load into the cab, and we start driving up the road to get back onto Chino Hot Springs Road, go find a better camping spot. We come around a bend, and we see that ahead of us, the river has jumped its banks and is coming down the road at us. My dad sits there idling for a moment, wondering what he should do. He decides chains will probably be the best solution, because chains really help in driving upriver. And so he gets out and he puts on the chains, muttering to himself. We three are sitting in there like, this is not what we were expecting to see. So as Dad gets all chained up, he's like, okay, boys, here we go. We start driving up the road. Pretty soon we're driving up the river. The water's coming up, and he tells my brother, John, who's the 9-year-old sitting closest to the window, okay, son, I want you to climb out the window and sit on the cab. And when debris comes downriver at us, I want you to push it out of the way. So here's my brother John, kicking his feet on the truck, pushing out sticks and making sure that nothing torpedoes us. And we're going, we're driving upriver. Finally, we start to float. My dad realizes the chains may not be able to save him this time and says, abandon truck, it's time to go. So we climb out the windows. He takes the canoe off of the top of the truck, sets it onto the road/river. We put the boys into it. We put whatever supplies we can in the back, and we start paddling up road. And we watch the truck go down behind us. So we're going up the rapids and paddling upstream, and we're going up and down and around, and we come to a high point where it's dry, and my dad decides this would be a good place to camp and have a little break. So we have a nice little view of our truck disappearing under the water as we make our hot chocolate and make sure everybody's well accounted for. And then we decide, no, we should go home. So we load into the canoe and go down road again. And finally we come to gravel, and come to dry land, and we just leave the canoe, we leave all the supplies, and we start the walk back to Fairbanks. It is, by this time it's 10:30 p.m. or so. It's dark. There's nothing going on. And so we are walking down Chena Hot Springs Road with not a car in sight. Finally, we come up to one of the general stores. It's closed, but my dad decides I'm going to make a phone call. So he goes and pounds on the door, and light comes on. They open up, and he explains the situation, and they say, of course, you can call. The phone rings at home, and my mother, who has been giggling to herself all day and reading her mystery novels in her pajamas in bed, gets the call that, "Hi, honey. So we lost the truck, and we need a ride. We're coming home. Love you, bye." So my mom comes out and gets us. We all load into the car. It is a very quiet ride home, except for the murmurs coming under my mom's breath about losing the truck and have to deal with boys. So we get home, everybody collapses. A few days later, we head on out to try and salvage the truck, see what'll happen. So we get some friends, get a winch, and we go and we find the truck, and we hook up to it and pull it out, and there's a little corner of the bed that didn't go under. And they drain the fluids, they put new oil, put new gas in. My dad drives it home and drives it for the next 10 years. And that's why I hate camping to this day. Thank you very much.
That's James Menaker, everybody. He's not only a talented storyteller, he's also an author, and he has a book for sale after the event tonight. So most of us, if we're lucky, have only maybe one or two near-death experiences in our life. Our next storyteller had 3 in 1 week. I would like to introduce Richard Coleman and his story, which I call The White Guy Goes First.
I have an old Athabascan friend that I've known for 50 years. Lives across the Tanana River from Fairbanks, and we'll call him Howard. I met him about 50 years ago, and I think I liked his lifestyle, so over the years I just kind of give him a hand when I could. So one day, not too long ago, I get a call, and will I come down to his camp, bring my little John boat, and come down to his camp and help him slide his skiff into the river. At springtime, the river ice has went out. Not many ice cubes coming down, and everything will be okay. So I'd run into this before, and I'm thinking to myself, now how much trouble can I get into? The ice is out, it's gone, and nice sunny day, so I tow my boat down to the river, Chena Pump Landing, put it in, and motor on down to his place on the south side of the Tanana. And the Tanana River is, it doesn't make any difference. If it's low and slow, high and fast, frozen, it's a semi-dangerous place, and if you don't do things just right, things go wrong. So I get down to his camp, and he's standing on the riverbank waiting, got a couple of bags ready to go to town. He's been standing there for 30 days waiting for the ice to go out so and he's ready to go to town. So we get a couple poles and pry his little skiff loose from the ground and froze down still. And he gets on the back of the boat pushing, and I get up front pulling on the boat rope. And we head down the riverbank, and there's a lot of shore ice. So we're sliding the boat out on the river, and there wasn't any time for anything. All of a sudden, I was looking up at a hole in ice, and it was going away. The hole was going away from me. And the water was so cold, my brain would only register, holy crap, it's cold. And over and over I was saying that in my brain, and I knew I had to concentrate and do something, but I had to overcome this holy crap, it's cold that's running through my brain. And so I'm looking around under the ice, and it's winter the ice water clears up a little. It's kind of blue-gray under there. It's not muddy anymore. And so I'm looking up at the ice. The hole's going away from me. And there's kind of air cavities, and the water is fairly clear. I could see a lot of detail going on, and I told myself I got to get doing something because I'm going down the river. And I started swimming, trying to make it back up to that hole. Never had touched bottom, and when I started swimming, I realized I had the boat rope that I had been pulling on was still in my hand. And from then on, I switched from holy crap, it's cold, to hang on to the rope. And I concentrated on the rope, and I come back up the rope, popped out of the hole in the ice, and maybe I'd been in the water for 10 or 15 seconds, but I had no muscle control. I just didn't have anything left in just seconds. I couldn't get myself out of the water, and Howard knew that he wasn't going to be able to just reach and grab me and pull me out. And he was up at the top of the hole with the little boat on top of the ice, and so he took an oar and shoved the boat over against me. And with that, I had something to push on, and I did push myself out on top of the ice. So I had survived that, but I was panicky. Of course, it was very cold, but the sun was shining, and I had a dry jacket hanging on a bush that I had left behind before we started this. So I stripped off my shirt and put on this dry fleece jacket I had, and immediately started feeling a little bit better. Howard's got his cabin all locked up, stoves off, and he's ready to go to town. And so I said, well, Howard, I said, I'm feeling better. I said, it's only 2 miles up to the boat landing. I said, I can make that. Let's just take off. So we slid his little boat into the river, got the motor running. I did the same thing with mine, and away we go up the Carnahan River in little open boats. And I immediately started feeling very good. I was kind of a glow. I was very happy to be alive. It was dawning on me how close a call I'd had and not recognizing what was the matter with me. So I get up, both of us get our 2 boats up to the Chena pump landing. Howard wanted to take his boat on up the Chena to town. And so he went on, give me a wave, and went on up the river, and I turned mine into the boat landing. When I got to the bank, I drove my boat about halfway out of the water and stood up to get out. When I stood up, I just fell over backwards into the rocks, and my legs wouldn't work, and I had hypothermia. And I woke up sometime later. I knew I'd been unconscious. My waist down, my legs were waving around in the river, and my top half was out of the water, and nobody around. And so I checked myself out, decided things weren't broke, couldn't find anything really wrong with me, and so I got up and got in my truck and got the heater running and things warmed up a little and got to feeling better again. So I loaded up my boat and went home. Heater running all the way home, and so I got home and I was telling my wife the story, and she had over the years got used to things like this, and so I changed clothes, got some dry clothes on, and I went out the rest of the day, worked in the backyard the rest of the day. and everything was cool. And next morning I got up and I'm sitting on the toilet, and I reached over to get some toilet paper, and my right arm just went off 180 degrees off in the blue there, and it wouldn't do anything I wanted it to, and my right side was paralyzed, and I knew something was haywire. And got my wife, and she run me down to the emergency room, and didn't take them but a few minutes of the emergency room, and they said, well, you've banged your head, you're bleeding inside your brain cavity, and pressure's building up, and you've got to get to Anchorage. We're going to medevac you to Anchorage right now. And it was just minutes they had me on a jet to Providence Hospital. Once I got to Providence Hospital, they kept me in a coma for 4 days, observing if the pressure was going to go down, if the bleeding was going to stop. And so 4 days later, I came to, and my first recollection was that my youngest son had just walked in the door to take me home. He drove down to Anchorage and going to drive me home. And I was madder than hell because I had thought I had just arrived at Anchorage, and Providence was kicking me out of the hospital because nothing could be done for me. And I was really upset. And so drove back to Fairbanks, and I'm bedridden. My head was in bad shape, and I was laying flat on the bed for days. And I was having hallucinations and thought I was losing my mind. Had no idea what was wrong with me. So my wife rushes me to my regular doctor here in Fairbanks again, and he looks at my chart and he says, no, he says, you're not losing your mind. He says, you're in drug withdrawals. He says, they gave you so much dope in the Anchorage hospital that you're having withdrawals. So come to find out, during this 4 days I'd been in the hospital, I had got violent. And I was too big, and nurses couldn't handle me. Everybody was afraid of me. And they'd call my wife at the hotel where she was staying and ask her what to do, and she'd say, give him more dope. So that's what happened. My doctor told me, he says, you're having drug withdrawals. You're going to be okay. And as soon as he said that, I knew immediately that that's what the case was, and I started improving. But this all took like 2 months. I was down for 2 months. So one day I'm feeling pretty good, and I called Howard. He had never known of this story. He had never heard anything, and knew anything was wrong with me, I don't think. And I called Howard, and I said, Howard, do you always put the white man out in front? So that's my story.
Is he here? Did he make it?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, all right.
Right down there in the second row is Howard Luke. Howard, raise your hand.
Richard Coleman, everybody. Richard has 2 books he's written about his life in Alaska. He grew up here, and I've had a chance to read a little bit of one of them. It's fantastic. So those books are available for sale after the show as well. So for most of us, before reality TV, if you wanted to get your Alaska fix, you watched Northern Exposure, right? And when I first came up here, people said, oh, it's just like Northern Exposure. And I found that wasn't particularly true for me, but it was fairly true for our next storyteller. Wendy Demers is going to tell her story about moving to Wales, Alaska, population 120, from New Jersey. And her story, what did I call it in the program? Is that kosher? Is that how you say that? Anyway, Wendy Demers, ladies and gentlemen. That was a terrible.
I remember it vividly. It was August 2nd, 2000, and I was on the smallest plane I had ever been on in my life. 10 seats, 8 of which were taken up by young kids that were coming back from church camp out in Nome, the pilot, and myself in the co-pilot seat. I don't know how I ended up so lucky. It was a clear day, but it was really windy, and I mean windy. We were leaving Nome, and in a small plane like that, you can feel just about everything. We landed in a few villages, and when we finally arrived, as we were coming into Wales, the pilot was telling me, you know, out there, you see the 2 islands out there, that's the Diomede Islands, and the small one is US, is America. And just a mile further is Big Diomede Island, and that's Russia. The international date line runs between. I said, oh, I didn't realize that on a clear day we actually could see Russia. So we buzzed over the village. He said, well, we're just going to let everybody know we're arriving because the airport in Wales, Alaska is just an airstrip. That's it. There's no buildings, just an airstrip. And so we buzzed the village, and we came in for a landing, and I noticed as we were coming in that there was a broken plane on the right side of the runway, and there was a broken plane on the left side of the runway. And I looked at the pilot, and I said, what happened? And he said, oh, well, there were a couple of, inexperienced pilots, didn't know how the crosswinds work up here on the peninsula, and he said, it's nothing to worry about. Nobody was seriously injured. And I'm like, so you've been flying up here for a long time then? And he said, oh, a couple of months. But we landed safely, I was happy to say, and, I'm here, so. And as the plane came to a stop, I noticed that there were a bunch of people there to greet the kids that were getting off the plane, and there was a teacher that I was introduced to, a gentleman named Eric, who was a returning teacher in the village, and he came to welcome me, as well as this gentleman named Frank, who was the school's maintenance man. And he brought with him his four-wheeler and a trailer behind his four-wheeler to lug all of my stuff to my new apartment that I was going to be staying in. And so as Frank was helping me load my luggage, I had a couple of suitcases and an oversized fish box filled with halibut that I caught in Valdez the week before. He asked me, what's in the box? And I said, oh, well, there's halibut. He's like, all of it? And I said, well, there's a little bit of dry ice and some butter, but it's pretty much all halibut. And he was like, do you like to trade? And I said, well, I knew I was coming to a reindeer herding village, and so I was hoping that halibut would be good barter material. And so, yeah. And he's like, okay, well, he loads everything up onto the trailer, and he hops onto the four-wheeler, and I hopped on behind him. And on the way to my apartment, I said, so, Frank, how far is my apartment from the school? And he says, oh, about quarter mile, couple of months be half mile. And I thought he was just pulling my leg, but I'll get back to that. So Frank very kindly helped me load everything into my apartment, and I was first wanting to unload the fish box, hoping that everything had stayed frozen for the 2-day travel, because back then we had to first fly back to Anchorage and then to Nome, and then overnight in Nome, and then take a small plane the next day. So I was loading the halibut into the freezer. I'd been in the apartment for maybe 15 minutes or so, and I hear a on the door. And I open the door, and there's Frank with the hind end of a reindeer on his shoulder and a big smile on his face. And I'm talking belly, butt, legs, just up on his shoulder. And he says, where'd you want it? I was like, well, the kitchen sink, I guess. So he popped it in the kitchen sink, and we decided how much halibut he was going to take with him, and he left with a really big smile. And about 10 minutes later, I'm still loading stuff into the freezer, and I'm thinking about what I'm going to do with this deer in my sink, and I hear another on the door. And so I go and open the door, and there's this long gray-haired gentleman standing in the doorway there, and he says, my name's Clifford. I hear you have halibut for trade. And I said, well, yeah, I do. And he says, well, I have some walrus. I'm like, I'm a Jewish girl from Jersey. I have no idea what to do with walrus. Is it good? And he's like, oh, it's real good. You'll love it. I said, well, why not? So he trades me some halibut for some walrus and leaves with a big smile. And about 15 minutes later, there's another on my door. And so I opened the door, and it was a local pastor from the Lutheran church there. And he introduced himself and said, welcomed me to the community and said, I hear you have some halibut for trade. And I said, yeah, I do. He says, I have some muskox roasts. Would you be interested? And I'm like, sure, why not? So I trade him for some muskox, and he leaves with a smile and a thank you and everything. And about, 10 minutes after that, there's yet another on my door. And I open the door, and this woman introduces herself. She says, my name's Lena. I'm an elder in the community, and I'm inviting you for your first Eskimo dinner. And I said, well, great. She goes, I live 2 doors that way. And I said, all right, great. She says, I invited Eric. He's coming too. I said, super. I said, what time is dinner? What time should I get there? And she says, dinner starts when you get there. I said, super. So I had been in town for about an hour. I'd met a handful of locals. I'd met one of the teachers. I'd met the minister as well. And I had a freezer that was half filled with halibut, muskox, walrus meat, and I had the hind end of Rudolph in my sink. It was a pretty good first night. So the next morning I decided I should probably call back to Jersey, let my folks know everything was all right and all. My mother and I are talking, and I explained to her, the 2-day trip out, and I explained to her about the broken planes on the side of the runway, and of course having walrus my first night in town. And she says, Wendy, they don't have roads? What do you mean they don't have roads to get there? You couldn't drive? And they have broken planes? They didn't get rid of the planes? What's wrong with them? That's crazy. And Yves, you ate walrus? Is it kosher? She obviously didn't get it. So going back to Frank telling me about the travel from my apartment to the school being a 1/4 mile and then a 1/2 mile, you remember that? So I found out about middle of October he wasn't joking. So the wind in Wales, Alaska is about 20 miles an hour all the time with lots of gusts. I mean, it gusts. I've never seen or heard wind quite like I did in Wales, Alaska. It got to the point where I couldn't even sleep when I came back here because it was too quiet. Anyway, by middle of October, the snow started drifting. And I was told by the locals that it wasn't safe to walk on the beach to school once winter really set in because the polar bears could come in on the ice floe. And they said, as long as you're walking with someone slower, you're okay. But since I was alone, I figured I'd better walk through the community to get to school. And so I went to open my door, the Cunnintuck door, which is the Arctic entryway, and I was faced with just a wall of snow. There was about 1 foot to 2 feet at the top of the doorway that I could see out. And I was just really glad I'd left the shovel inside. So I proceeded to take the shovel and dig some little holes in the snowdrift and climbed my way up and pushed the shovel out the top of the door and proceeded to slide out like a seal on my belly out the top of the door and started digging my way out. And about 30 minutes later, I got the snow about to thigh high and thought, well, I really need to get going or I'm going to be late for school. And as I started walking towards the school, I see the first snowdrift. And it went from one side of the path to the other. There was no getting around it. And I knew that the beach wasn't an option, so I had to walk through the snowdrift, and it was about waist deep for me. I thought, well, it can't be too bad. I was wrong. As I started walking into this snowdrift, it was like quicksand, and it took me a good 10 minutes to wiggle all the way through the drift, and I worked up a pretty good sweat, and I realized if at this rate, with 6 or 7 more drifts left to cross through, that I was going to be late for work. So I thought, well, I'll look around and see if there are any kids around, because they were really good at giving advice. But nobody was on their way to school yet. So I decided, well, I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher now. I should be able to figure this out. And so as I'm walking up to the next snowdrift, the light bulb went on. And I realized, I need to disperse my weight. So I cinched my backpack down, and I got down on all fours, and I crawled up on top of this drift. And as I started getting to the top of it, I was sinking. So I quickly laid down, and I just barrel rolled down the other side of it. And it worked like a charm. I was over it really quickly, and I was pretty proud of myself, and I was laughing and looking for somebody to laugh with, and nobody was around, so I just proceeded to crawl and roll my way to school. And All the while I'm thinking, I wonder if there are any other teachers in the world getting to school quite like this. So the rest of the day proceeded pretty normally until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Lena came into my classroom with a grandbaby on each hand, and she looks at me and she says, "Wendy, I was standing in my kitchen this morning looking out the window, sipping on my coffee, and I saw you crawling and rolling. And I turned to my husband, I said, 'Raymond, what in the world is that white woman doing?'" Needless to say, I was pretty embarrassed, and I explained that I didn't think I was going to get to work any other way, and nobody was around to give advice, so she looked at me and she said, "We decided it's time to give you your real Eskimo name." And I said, "Oh, that's great." I said, "What's my name going to be?" And she said, "Anukli." I said, well, what does that mean?" She said, "It means windy, like the wind outside. Now we can say, Anukli, it's Anukli out." I heard that a lot. It caught on quick, very quickly. So it was an interesting experience being there. The other experience during that time in Wales that really kind of hit home with me was during the Thanksgiving Day holiday. They had a big potlatch at the school, and I really wanted to contribute to the potlatch. So about a month before, I had gotten a hold of my folks and asked my mom if she could send me a care package with some matzo ball soup mix and all the fixings. And she did, and it got there on time, which was a good thing. And so I made all the matzo balls at home the evening before, and I brought that into the school and went in quite early in the morning and took one of the big pots that they had in the kitchen there and started cooking a huge pot of matzo ball soup. And I was cooking. As it was almost ready, Lena kept coming into the kitchen saying, "What you cooking? What you cooking, Wendy?" And I said, "Well, you'll see. It'll be done soon." So when it was finally finished, I brought it out and I set it on the table with all of the other food out there in the cafeteria. And Lena was the first one to the pot. She takes off the lid and she grabs the ladle and starts stirring. And she's got her eyebrows all scrunched down. She says, "What's that floating in the soup?" And I said, "Well, they're kind of like dumplings. They're called matzo balls." They said, "You fed me walrus my first night in town. Try it." And she took a little bowl and she had one matzo ball and she stepped aside. And it seemed like everybody was watching her. And she dug in and she took one spoonful and her eyes lit up a little bit. And she went right back and filled up her bowl. And she ate that soup. And I'm proud to say that I fed 120 Eskimos matzo ball soup, and I've got video footage to prove it. It was pretty cool. My experience in Wales wasn't all fun and games, but I learned a lot about the Eskimo culture. I learned a lot about myself, too. I learned that you don't need a lot to be happy there. You can open up your jacket on a good windy day, and it can act like a sail and just push you home, but the kids would tell you, make sure you lean into the wind or you could end up face planting, which isn't pretty. I learned that you don't need a good sled or a good pair of skis to enjoy the snowdrifts in town. You just needed a good pair of slippery pants. It was a really good experience. I'm glad I had an opportunity to live in Wales and partake in the culture there, and it's something I'll never forget. Thank you.
Wendy Demers, ladies and gentlemen. Our next storyteller, I hesitate to mention this, has the distinction of giving me what I think is probably some of the worst advice I've ever gotten in my life. Wayne Gentz believes everybody should spend one night in jail at some point in their lives. And for those of you who have not had the privilege, I hope that you'll pay attention as he tells this story, which I call Spanking a Black Belt.
Anyhow, this was a high-tension day. We had our own apartment building and tenants living right next door, and this one kid was really a real pain in the ass, you might say. He always had his drums and everything going in the apartment. I had to call the cops on him a couple of times, and it was about 35 years ago. We were building the Moose Creek Dam on a Saturday and a high-tension day that time, and I took the afternoon off because my one daughter was having her first communion. And then my little daughter at the first communion, she had to run up behind the pulpit and make the tension a little more. anyhow, when we got home, it was pretty late, maybe about 10 o'clock at night in June when, the sun is out all night. And here's this guy, he's plugged into my boiler room, and he's got his drums going on right next door, it's disturbing the whole neighborhood there. So I took this old ice scraper handle that I had, and I walked up there and I whacked it across the cymbals, and I says, "Now, you son of a get it out of here." And anyhow, he stood up in front of me, long hair down his shoulder blades, up and down, hit me, motherfucker, and I didn't touch him. And the guy pushed me. And then I gave that guy a damn licking like he never had in his life, And they took him up to the hospital to look at his stripes on his rear end. And then, of course, his dad had me a citizen's arrest, and the cops came out to get me. And they were laughing about, look, who's arresting who, So anyhow, they take me out to the jail there, and we got this one guy that's my roommate. So you're in the holding pen, And then the young kid comes in, and they got him standing against the screen like this here, against the glass, and troopers frisking him, and all of a sudden, like lightning, that little sucker, he turns around, kicks that trooper. If they put him up there once more, and if he doesn't do it again. And then the next one comes in, she's being brought in, and they think it's a guy, and they start frisking him and discover this is a girl, and then they had to call the lady jailer, Well, then the next morning, they take us to get arraigned, and my son Todd and my wife have to come and be the witness. They figured they were probably going to bring me home, after everybody else gets arraigned, but they wouldn't arraign me. And not that I was disappointed about that, but the judge had told the guy that if he pressed any charges against me, he was going to follow up on him because he already had a warrant out for his arrest. Anyhow, so it's really interesting when you go through the jail process there, and that's why I say that everybody should have at least one day in jail to get the experience of what it's like, And that's about it.
Wayne, I just wanted to warn you there's a trooper out that way. I think maybe you might want to go out that way. They're still coming after you're going to get arraigned one of these days. Well, when I was organizing this event, first thing I did was call up all the best storytellers that I knew to see if they had a story to tell. And our next storyteller is definitely an example of that. Michael Daku is a colleague of mine at UAF, and he really shouldn't be here tonight. It's not because the story isn't good, it's because the story should have killed him. And so right now I'd like to welcome Michael Daku and his story, which I call The Average Pilot.
One day, a friend of mine and I decided, you know what, there's this awesome fishing place that we need to go into. And of course, whenever anybody asks me, where do you go fishing, I usually say, well, let me narrow it down for you. It's between Fairbanks and the Brooks Range. Okay, so I want to give you an exact location. So anyway, we got this idea, we want to go into this place. So we did some basic pilotage, we have our maps, and we're flying north of here, and so on and so forth. And we were looking around, and lo and behold, we couldn't find the place. It's like, well, it's this river, and there's supposed to be this strip there, and there's like awesome grayling fishing and blah, blah, blah. We're looking around, and it's like, well, crap, we can't find the place. So it's like, well, you know what, let's just turn around. Well, sometimes fate strikes at the wrong time. And if you can picture this, we're flying, and I said, well, let's just get out of here, So I started to turn to the left, and I just happened to go like this and look behind me, and it's like, you know what? That looks like a strip back there along the river. I wonder if that's the place. So it's like, well, let's go check it out. And of course, we're fat, dumb, and happy, so we go in there and made a pass over, and it's like, you know what? I think this is the place. So let me set the stage for you. Coming in, make the pass, and what you had is, on the left-hand side, you kind of had a hill with spruce trees, and then you had the overgrown strip, majorly overgrown strip, and then the river that parallels it on the right-hand side and kind of winds its way over. So we do one pass over, and it looks okay. And at that time, I had practiced a lot of short field takeoffs and landings. And so the plane at the time, just to familiarize yourself, had manual flaps. So in between the seats here, you had your handle for the flaps, and you could literally dump 40 degrees of flaps, and you could literally fall like a rock. And so I can land that plane very, very slow and very, very short. So we did one more pass, and it's like, okay, it looks good. We kind of lined it up and went ahead and landed. And we bumped our way through, and there's this high grass, and of course we're shredding the grass with the prop as we're going, and everything's cool, and then we come to a stop, and it's like, okay, good deal, we're here. So we get out, everything looks fine. We go fishing for a few hours, and it's finally like, well, I guess we're ready to get out of here. So it's like, okay, and I had a little bit of, in the back, sometimes in the back of your head, it's like, you know what? I don't know if I should have came to this place. But it's like, I'm looking at my friend, and it's like, it's too late, and we have to get the hell out of here. So I said, okay, what we're going to do is we'll set up for a classic, what we'd call a short field takeoff. So, of course, this is a small aircraft, and anytime you're flying small aircraft, you're really concerned about the weight that you have. So I said to my friend, look, do you have to go to the bathroom? Literally, go now. You know that peanut butter and jelly sandwich you have left over? Throw it out, right? I mean, this is how concerned you are. So you got to picture this. We had the plane at the one end of the strip, and we basically turned it around, and what we did is we pushed the plane back into the weeds, literally. So the tail, the butt end, is literally sticking out, sticking into the weeds. So it's like, okay, we're set. Now, before we did this, however, we walked up and down that strip two abreast because we wanted to make sure that we didn't miss any holes, logs, whatever was there, and it looked good. I also took a soda can, and I put a soda can down on the left-hand side in one of just kind of like in a willow on the side there. And I said to myself, okay, what we're going to do is, this is our go, no-go point. If I don't have speed up at this point, we're not going anywhere. We're going to figure some way else out of here. So we got the plane in the back in the weeds, start her up, and the procedure for a short field takeoff basically is you give full power, you make sure everything looks okay, full power, you're holding the brakes down as toe brakes, hold the brakes down, and of course it's a little intimidating because you're standing still and you're at full power, right? So, one of these deals. And I let go of the brakes. It's like, okay, here we go. I pull that yoke back a little bit. Here we go. And we're rumbling down. I'm watching my speed indicator, and I see the pop can coming up on the left-hand side, and it's like, okay, we're ready. And I start to rotate up, and we just start to climb out, and suddenly it felt like the hand of God comes and boom, hits us. Big wind shear, shakes us, and then the world stops. Because one of the things you don't want to hear if you are a pilot is this sound, and it kind of goes like this. One of the sounds is yourself saying, oh shit. The other sound sounds something like this. Right? If you're familiar with that sound, that's the stall horn. What the stall horn means is you've exceeded your plane's angle of attack. Well, what they tell you in pilot training is, and of course I don't have a lot of altitude, is to break a stall you have to push your nose over. And of course it's against everything in your body to say to push the nose over. If you don't, what's going to happen is you're going to basically nosedive in, and it's going to hurt real bad. So what happened is, when I heard that stall horn go off, and this was the weirdest thing about this whole experience, I remember stopping. Time basically stood still at that point, and I can remember saying to myself, and I I actually remembered chuckling, because this is what it's kind of weird, the things you think about. And I said to myself, so this is how people die in a plane crash. I swear, that's what I said to myself. And the other very, very interesting thing that happened, though, is they say oftentimes, if you're faced with a life or death situation, a lot of times people say, well, my life flashed in front of me. My life actually didn't flash in front of me. What happened was, as that stall horn came on and I realized what was happening, my life went basically like the negatives of a film. It went chick, 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 and it was like basically in like 10-year, decade increments, like 10 years, 10 years, 10 years, 10 years. And thinking back when I talked to Rob about it, I couldn't remember any specifics within those 10 years, but they were just kind of like etchings of things during that 10 years. Anyway, I did push the nose over. Subsequently, when I pushed the nose over, we were able to come in, and when we came in, I kind of flattened the glide path out. And remember, the river's over here, there's a bunch of boulders, different stuff, rocks. And basically what happened is we sheared the gear off, the right wing clipped the river, this is how close we were, pulled that wing up like this, and we finally came to a halt. It sheared the prop off, sheared the gear off, and we came to a position with the severe nose down position like this. And at that point, I looked over at my friend, and he wasn't responding. He was kind of slumped over, and I thought, oh my God, how am I going to explain this? He's broken his neck. This is not going to be good. Well, subsequently he didn't. He got kind of shook up for a second. And we were literally so close to the river that if we went ahead and he tried to open his door, he would literally have gone into the river. So anyway, we were able to get out of the plane. We went ahead and got to the point where we try to contact folks in terms of getting somebody to come and get us and quote, rescue us. So we set the ELT, which is the emergency locating transmitter, and try to pick some folks up. And I was going ahead and giving calls, mayday calls on the radio. After about half an hour of this, suddenly, like the voice of God appeared. And this voice said over the radio, aircraft in distress, this is Northwest 85, go ahead. Well, who this was a Northwest Airlines pilot going over the pole. And I explained our predicament. He called Anchorage Center. They sent out the Civil Air Patrol, et cetera, and they also sent out one of our local agencies to come and get us. Well, about 7 hours passed, and the local agency came out and got us with a helicopter. And there were 2 people on the copter in the front, the pilot and the other person. So we sat in a helicopter. They asked for paperwork. And they didn't, basically, it was kind of strange because they didn't say anything to us. So we're whoop, 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 all the way back to Fairbanks, treetop level, landed in a special location in Fairbanks, which happens to be on Pega Road. And so I don't have to go into details on that. But here's the thing. We land there, and there wasn't a word spoken to us. And my friend and I are looking at each other like this, like, wow, this is really bizarre, It's like, what's going to happen next? Well, the pilot shuts down the helicopter. We hear it spool down. These 2 guys, basically, one on each side, they looked at us, and then they did this. They walked away. So we're looking at each other going, what is the story here? And I was expecting like Rod Serling to pop up behind a bush and go, consider this, 2 pilots, one an average guy, an average pilot, right? That's like just totally bizarre. Postscript, I'm reading sometime later a copy of Private Pilot magazine, and the issue had to do with times when folks usually have an accident, how many hours on average do people go? And there's certain times in a pilot's life, if you will, where they have accidents. And I'm reading the article, and it's like, wait a second, how many hours? Wait a second, let me get the logbook. How many hours? I hit it almost right on the nose. 400 hours. There it is. There's your average pilot. Thanks very much.
Michael Daku, he teaches in the criminal justice department at UAF, and I assure you he's just as funny in his classes as he is. And they're probably just as life-threatening as that was.